Finally!
So, I'm Norris and I am a football coach at Bradford City Women's Section. But more importantly, I'm also a PhD student, and my PhD thesis was on a qualitative investigation of social support among sports coaches.
Okay, can you explain the background of your research area and why you decided to research that?
I'm from Norwich originally, so I started doing my undergrad at Norwich, at University of East Anglia. That was more general in sport and exercise science. From there, I found it really interesting in the sports psychology modules. Well, I applied for Loughborough, got into Loughborough University, and did sport and exercise psychology there. From there, I applied to a PhD here at Leeds Beckett, which kind of combined my two passions together of coaching, because I'm a sports coach as well, as mentioned earlier, but also the sports psychology bit. Originally, I was supposed to be around occupational stress, health and well-being among sports coaches, but it soon developed into looking at social support among sports coaches. Well, overall the PhD consisted of 4 papers. The first study was actually a systematic review looking at stressors, coping and well-being among sports coaches. So give it a bit of background as well about how there's been a recent shift towards research of coaches, because they're realising the influence they can have on athlete performance. They need just as much help as what athletes do. From preliminary readings, there was only one, it was a narrative review that looked at stresses and coping with sports coaches by Fletcher and Scott in 2010, but it wasn't, a systematic review. Because a systematic review is something that, like in the hierarchy of evidence, is at the top of the pyramid sort of thing, because of the process and stuff and the methods you have to go through to do it. It wasn't anything that had done that, and that was also 7 years earlier than what the systematic review was, so there was scope there to be able to do this systematic review. How do I put this? It's a bit of a laborious task. It's not the most exciting thing in the world. First of all, I did it through what's called PRISMA guidelines, so there's like set guidelines that you have to go through.
Did you set those guidelines yourself, or were they?
No, so they have guidelines online, and they have like a bit of a checklist which you basically have to go through. We did a few sort of like scoping searches where we tried to see what the searches were. The keywords end up being like coach, stress, stressors, well-being in 3 different ways, because it gets well-being with a hyphen in the middle, well-being without the hyphen in the middle, a bit of space, and then well-being all together, so we had to include all them. There was things like coping, stress management, just to make sure we covered all of the different bases. And we input these into 3 databases. So the first one was PsycInfo. So PsycInfo is more of a sports psychology based one. The second one was Sports Discus, which is a more sport general database. And then the last one is Web of Science, and that's just a more sort of psychology general database. So in that bit we covered the more sport specific and the psychology specific up onto the more broad, to make sure we don't necessarily miss anything. And we also did something called citation programming, which is when you look through reference lists of papers to see if there's any in there that you've missed. So particularly with like other reviews, so we didn't include other reviews within the inclusion criteria, but what we did was we looked through the reference list to see is there any other original papers that we can use to be able to do that. It had to be published between 1994 and when I was doing the searches, which was March 2016. They could be qualitative, quantitative or mixed methods papers. They had to be written in the English language, available in full text, and they were excluded if it was like conference proceedings or theses or things like reviews, because they're secondary sources. So yeah, it's all that process. That's why that makes systematic reviews sort of like influential. Well, there's been some previous research about how coaching is a particularly stressful occupation because of the various demands that it does. There's a couple of papers by like Farewell, for example. There's a couple of papers by Oli Soga, and they focus on qualitatively looking at stresses with sports coaches. There's quite a few where the stresses they have to encounter, and this is including things such as because they have to work on sociable hours, spending less time with family, for example, because a lot of coaches have jobs during the day, and then rather than go home, we'll go and do coaching, and then in the weekends that's also coaching. So they've got all this stuff to be able to deal with. There's research on with athletes. There seems to be more of a focus on athletes. I think this is because they're the ones that people put the attention on. They're the ones that go out and play on the field or has the camera on the majority of the time rather than the coaches. But recent research has realised actually the influence that coaches have on athletes. So this is stuff from like the sports psychologist Gould. He's done some stuff around that and found that if coaches are stressed, then this tends to influence the athletes and make them more stressed, which then reduces their performance. So because of that, that's where the recent research has come in. Coaches is only a fairly recent thing, especially qualitatively. It's only really come in 2007-ish, early 2000s. There's been a bit of a focus on looking at it qualitatively.
Okay, so what did you find out from doing that systematic review?
Good question. Quite a lot actually. So I'll break it down into the 3 sections that we looked at. So first we'll talk about the stressors, then I'll go into the coping bit, and then into the well-being side. So we found the majority of the papers that were reviewed looked at stressors with sports coaches. Stressors significantly were to do around performance. So first of all, obviously performance of the athletes and how coaches like a lot of control. And as much as they can control like training things during the week, as soon as they put the athletes out there, they can't control what their performance is because they don't like things that they can't control. Things with regards to training as well. Performance of athletes in training, are they performing at their optimum? Has the training session gone as planned? Has the competition gone as planned? Things like that. So coaches got really stressed out and put a lot of pressure on themselves to perform. So if a training session didn't go very well, for example, then they put a lot of reflection time and think about, okay, why didn't this go well? Is it something that I did? There's also organisational stresses. So this is things such as paperwork, trying to work out the travel. This is a stressor for a lot of coaches at a variety of different levels. Then there's also interpersonal relationships. So that's relationships with others and maintaining relationships with others. And this was where I think sports coaches are particularly stressful because they have to think about media, players, parents, depending on what age group they're coaching. You've obviously got pressure from organisation above, other coaches, family members. One of the really interesting bits about the contextual stuff is gender. So there's, especially the early stuff I mentioned earlier about like Kelly in 1994, talks around how that female coaches perceive that they encounter more stresses. However, male coaches tend to burn out more, which I find quite interesting. Majority of the coping strategies tend to be problem focused. This is all around how can they change something to cope with the situation.